Hello everyone and welcome to this week's Blockchain Gaming News Roundup with me, Jenny Jordan, and co-host John Jordan. Today is Friday, the 15th of August. Let's crack on, get straight into it. So this week you spoke to, this week the interview was published where you spoke to John Smedley from Distinct Possibility Studios. This new studios came out of kind of stealth just a couple of months ago, announcing Reaper Actual, a kind of Web2/Web3 shooter. You can dive more into that, which they raised 30.5 million for. It's not actually recent funding; it's kind of spread out, isn't it, since 2023. I'll let you sort of unfold all the details. So over to you.
Yes. So John Smedley it's been sort of quite recently, but like in the 90s and early 2000s, he was sort of quite a well-known figure in the games industry, particularly making for MMOs, for sort of persistent sort of world. So he's been, as I got his age wrong. I thought he was older, but he's 56, and he games 5 hours a night. He's very keen to demonstrate his gaming prowess. I mean, so that's sort of interesting. But he started off with EverQuest, which is actually the second, or certainly one of the early big MMO RPGs that sort of got really successful. And then he ran a company called Sony Online Entertainment, obviously part of Sony, and it was running a whole bunch of MMO RPGs at the time. Some really big ones. Star Wars Galaxies was obviously a very famous one with Star Wars, and some other ones. It was, had some sort of big hits at the time. And he actually also did one of the first battle royale games. So I wouldn't say his career has been a sort of a total success, but he's definitely been around for some of the big sort of pivot points and been sort of part of that. So he's someone who has a sort of pedigree. He's not like a someone who's just sort of been in a mid-ranking job. He's run some of these big companies. He actually most recently worked at Amazon doing their game studio stuff, but nothing came out of that because Amazon's a bit of a not worked out very well for them. But anyway, it's probably not John's fault. Anyway, so he's still got the fire in his belly. And he's created this new studio. It's actually been going for 2 years now. The game, as you say, is Reaper Actual, and they've been developing it for 2 years. And what's sort of interesting, I suppose, is easy for me to sort of critique what someone who's made millions of dollars in the games industry, probably billions of dollars, has been doing. But they've sort of ended up in a very sort of weird situation, or it's interesting to sort of look at the game they're doing and sort of where they've ended up and what that says about the games industry at the moment and what this says about blockchain, I think. So he's had this idea for a long time. In a sense, Reaper Actual is a sort of a development of the sort of games he's made before. They had a series called PlanetSide, which is a sort of sci-fi game, and it's sort of a little bit similar to that. So it is persistent, but it's sort of you're playing on this big island. I think they're saying about 200 players per island. So there's going to be lots of different islands, obviously, because they want more than 200 players. But they're going to try and sort of have persistence they're going to try and have player affinity. So if me and you are playing a lot in this game, it will try and put us in the same island. So obviously that may not work. That's a sort of an interesting technology, but that's how they're trying to do persistence. And also you have a base, and obviously the base is persistent across every play session. And as you build up things in your base and do crafting in your base and put weapons on your base, that's persistent. Although that might be going on different sort of instance islands. So it's sort of interesting from that point of view. It's an extraction shooter, which is a very popular genre at the moment. There's quite a lot of innovation going on. There have been some quite successful games, although not quite mass market ones, I would say. So he's sort of mixing up that, and he's got this base, so you can attack people's bases and they're fighting in the base. So he's got these two different elements, like a big open world where you're running around doing missions, and they have this complicated AI system that everyone's sort of playing, feeding into. So you might be sort of attacking certain of the factions or helping part of the factions, but you're not part of the faction. So it's interesting from a game design point of view. So far so good. He's doing this sort of big PC shooter game. Where the Web3 stuff comes in is obviously he and everyone now is very wary of on Steam you can't do blockchain games, although off the grid somehow seems to be doing it. But generally you can't. They don't let you do blockchain games. And there's a community on Steam who really hate blockchain games, also hate AI games. And so it's sort of hard to build a community for a blockchain game on Steam, because even for small percentages of people just go, this game's horrible, then it's hard to get sort of that social network going of people playing the game, particularly if you're trying to play with your friends. So what they decided to do is do a total Web 2 version for Steam and actually Epic as well. So there'll be this, it's the same version of the game effectively, but there's no NFTs. They will allow you to trade items through the Steam has its own blockchain, hilariously, called Epic Community Market. So you better sell items and bases and stuff through there, but they won't be NFTs. There'll be Steam NFTs, and then they will have a Web3 version of the game as well. That'll be totally separate, running. You'll download that from the game's website. That will run on Tezos's Etherlink L2 blockchain. They're building all that stuff with Sequence, so they have their own marketplace and NFTs. And the things that are NFTs in the Web3 game will also be sort of you'll be able to buy those as well in the Web 2 game, but they won't be NFTs. So the bases and the skins and all this sort of stuff. So obviously, sort of what they're doing is they're making two games, or they're making a game and then splitting into two, which I think from a marketing point of view, or most people say from a marketing point of view, is ridiculous because you're splitting your market. And even in fact, they say that they're very precise, but they expect only 8% of their users to be playing the Web 3 game to begin with, which is quite obviously a small amount. And the thing about Web3 games and marketplaces is obviously you want as many people as possible in the Web3 marketplace driving liquidity. You don't want to split your liquidity. I mean, you're not splitting it because the other one's not a Web3 game, but you sort of are because you imagine more people will be buying the stuff on the Steam marketplace anyway. I'm sure they're well aware of those things. Those are not rocket science marketing business things that they won't have thought of. But I think it just goes to show where they feel the sort of market is at the moment. That we all know no game has gone mass market with a Web3 audience. So saying if they just did it as a Web3 game, they wouldn't be able to go on Steam really, and they would get I don't know how many tens of thousands at best of players of this game probably as a pure Web3 game. So they're splitting it because they want, obviously hundreds of thousands of people playing it on Steam. So you can see, it's a totally rational reason to do that. But equally, there are some games, different sorts of games like EVE Online just going with a totally Web3 game, but it's taken them many years to make that. And I guess Off the Grid is the other one where they're a purely Web3 game, although it looks like they're taking Web3 elements out for Steam or something. So there are different ways of doing it, but it's sort of a weird situation to end up in. And then you take another step back, and he was quite open about this, talking about funding. And when he was looking for funding in 2023, no one would fund the game apart from people like Bitcraft, and they got money from Tezos, obviously, which is why they're on the Tezos chain. Although they also say they really like the people at Tezos, and they're really big gamers, and so But in the best case scenario, I think John Smedley wouldn't have ended up having to fund his game from Web3 people. He would have got it from the normal people, and he would have just made a Web2 game. He's not burning. He's burningly passionate about this game, not blockchain. He's not a blockchain guy. He sort of ended up. He does think blockchain really adds, and he thinks in the long term, having a marketplace, and they want to do these things with servers, so allow people to rent servers and customize their servers and mod their game and do their own specialized servers. And he thinks blockchain is really important to that, which obviously makes sense. You can do things with payment systems that you can't do without blockchain. But they've ended up in this sort of slightly odd position, sort of, where maybe because of the funders, particularly Bitcraft led the first round, and all their investors are sort of Web3 investors. So they've ended up with sort of, even though they're not massive Web3 people, they've ended up with a game that is Web3, but the majority of the game won't be Web3. And you can just, it really depends. I mean, they would just say, we're going to make a great game. Our game's going to be so interesting, and the rest of it's not going to matter. And that could definitely be a scenario. But there can easily be a scenario where it's a bit of a sort of, just take a sort of bit of a so-so game, and you haven't appealed to any market, and so you end up in this sort of slightly weird situation. But I mean, from a game design point of view, it seems really interesting. It's at a high level for a game with Web3 features. So that's the advantage of their sort of slightly weird approach. It's going to be a really good game, or really sort of interesting game. For me, I'm not good enough to play these sort of shooters anything like a competitive level. But this game seems more interesting to me than, say, Off the Grid, which is just is just an absolute sort of competitive, mess for me. Whereas this one has, you're playing against AIs maybe some of the time, and you got your base, and you can sort of see there's a way of playing it where it's not, you'll have to be totally brilliant all the time and against other players. So it's interesting from that point of view. But they've ended up in a slightly, I would say, odd sort of situation through various through various sort of facts of the market.
When you mentioned Steam there, it seems like like a breakthrough on Steam for a Web3 game is sort of seen as that would be the ultimate kind of ultimate milestone or sign of success or so. But it's really difficult even for Web2 games to launch on Steam and
Yeah.
for new games to kind of see success there, because it's such an old which is, I think, is like 40% of players on Steam or kind of playtime it's spent on games that are over 8 years, 9 years old or something. I mean, it's a
Yeah, I
really
mean,
difficult audience to reach with something new and innovative. It seems
yeah, I mean,
very
I
much
think you're
traditional.
right. I mean, the game's space in particular, is in a very weird space at the moment. In terms of how, it's in terms of how it treats innovation. The big things that have happened recently, I would argue, are sort of blockchain and now generative AI. There's a whole bunch of hardcore gamers who hate both of them and won't even play games. Will actually complain about people who do play those. It's very toxic sort of. So it's sort of weird in terms of those base technologies. But even splitting that out, new games come in, and it's very hard for them to get any traction. You even see, games that cost hundreds of millions of dollars to develop just being sort of shut down overnight because the launch is so bad, or even totally off the totally sort of different. There's a massive game called Marathon from a well loved developer called Bungie. They've been working on that. It's a sort of reboot of a very old sort of IP, and they did a test on that, and that went really badly. And now they're delaying it for a year. I mean, just the sort of the game community, hardcore game community, is just so is just so not open to new things. Not it's not going out looking. Oh, what great new things can we try out? They're just very. If someone does try something new, they go, "Oh, it's not as good as this," but there's always something to complain about, and that makes it very difficult for any game to launch. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Mm-mm. Right then, let's move on. Talk about Shrapnel, like another shooter from US studio Neon Machine, who recently announced that they were moving from Avalanche, where they were building their own L1 for a long time, and they were migrating to Gala chain from Gala Games, and now they've announced some recent funding led by Gala Games. It was 19.5 million. I think it takes it up to raised over 50 million now in total, haven't they? And that's obviously to support the launch of Shrapnel, which has been in development now for, correct me if I'm wrong, 5 years or so.
So around that,
Yeah. And it also announced end of last year, early this year, that it was going to launch on the official trusted blockchain in China as the first sort of Web3 game to break into that market. So, yeah, do you have anything to comment?
Well, I think the funny thing about this is to see the reaction of people. So Shrapnel was a really loved game on Avalanche. There was they'd done a really good job on marketing, at least to sort of blockchain KOL. So everyone, all those sort of guys, absolutely love Shrapnel because it was again a very high end game from a high end studio. Obviously, they were having some problems in development. It was sort of not. It was. I was quite shocked when the first build came out. It was very very early. And you could sort of there was obviously then it sort of came out there were tensions within the games team. They were the founding management team was suing the original investor, and sort of as more of these sort of things came out, sort of Shrapnel became a sort of cause celeb for people to sort of point at some of the problems with Web3 gaming, which wasn't to do with the Web3 stuff, or but it had sort of knock on effects. But it's quite interesting to see how quickly. So it's about 2 weeks ago they announced they were moving from Avalanche. They were one of the first games to say we're going to run our own Avalanche L1, and they got loads of support from Avalanche, and they were the sort of big game. Them and Off the Grid was sort of marketed by Avalanche as these games can run on Avalanche. So there was lots of even though there were sort of problems for the project, it was still sort of much loved, and people still had a lot of sort of high hopes for it. But they previously, as you say, announced this really odd thing where they'd done a deal with a Chinese blockchain. Obviously, everything in China is sort of government sort of controlled, or to some degree. So it's a permissioned blockchain in China, and they were saying we want to launch in China and we can't do it on sort of Avalanche, so we're going to have a sort of separate version of the game, a bit like a Reaper Actual to some degree. Separate version of the game just for China with Chinese content. and that seemed really sort of weird, and people were going, they've been taken over by the CCP and blah, 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 all this sort of stuff. But it seemed like, that wasn't ridiculous. They obviously needed funding, and maybe they got some funding from China, so that would make sense. And but then the two things were sort of brought together recently, where they just said, oh, we're ditching Avalanche, and we're going to Gala chain. So Gala Games, without going into all that again, is basically, they are still have a lot of sort of value in the system in terms of financial value. It's still a big sort of blockchain token, even though they're totally discredited as actually, a serious place where people will put games. I mean, there just seem to be very dodgy practices going on there, and I'm not going into all that sort of stuff. But if you could choose a blockchain with less reputation, you couldn't. So basically, this sort of, at one point, this sort of most anticipated, really great team, and everyone sort of loved them on the best blockchain, have sort of moved to China and then gone to the worst blockchain possible out there. so it's sort of funny that what anyone else would, in this current environment, would announce like a $19.5 million of funding. And I'm like, wow, amazing! They're such a good team, token up. And everyone's like, all the KOLs just like, don't know how to deal with this. Yeah, ignore it, rubbish. It's just so the twist is the sort of the twin fiddle is just so funny. And to a degree, I sort of I'm there with them on that. It's just, I mean, you don't hope any game sort of not to work, and maybe it will really work well in China, but I think in the West now, it's not going to work. It's not going to get any support from the people who were supporting it before. Again, I've played some of the beta tests. Again, it's not, I can't play it. It's much too competitive PvP to shoot a game for me, but there was some really nice stuff there. Although the majority of their business model was all about, again, people building mods and people building maps and stuff like that. So it was a very, very long-term project. I always felt, knowing a little bit about it, it was much too ambitious. They were never going to get the money they needed to do that. It was hundreds of millions of dollars of project, and it just seemed too ambitious for what they were trying to do. So, but it's just sort of a funny arc of how you can go from sort of the highs to the lows. But it's the same. I mean, China's a massive market. If they really focus on localizing it, and if they just do it as a sort of Chinese game with, you have to do the content that the Chinese people like. They like very specific things, but technically, I think it's a solid game. So can absolutely work for them.
In the world, so you can probably drop the West and just focus on that and see bigger success if you can be sort of the first big pioneer coming in, I suppose. Right, let's move on. Craftworld from Voya Games, or Angry Dynamite, as they might be better known as, launched on Ronin, let's get this right, 2.5 weeks ago, 30th of July, and it has since climbed to become the biggest dominating game in terms of transactions and gas on Ronin, which is quite impressive, really, considering the traffic that's there. But it also sort of maybe indicates the low activity of the other kind of games around Katana. But so talk us through a little bit what that means.
Yeah, I mean, because I've followed this game for so long and sort of very close to them, I sort of find it fascinating. But it's sort of like the idea is, if you drop I used to say fully on-chain game, but people point out it's maybe not fully on-chain. If you drop an almost fully on-chain game onto a sort of blockchain which doesn't really have a lot of activity, there's activity on Ronin, but a fully on-chain game, so everything you do in the game is a transaction. So it's very different to like a game like Axie, where you might sort of claim some stuff or buy an Axie. That's the on-chain stuff. Playing Axie is not doing any transactions. Whereas with Craftworld, a lot of the changing between any of the resources is a transaction. So you could easily be doing 20 transactions a day just by sort of selling this and buying this. So there's only about 1,000 wallets on currently playing the game. In terms of, there's more people playing that, but in terms of people doing on-chain transactions, about 1,000 a day. So it's quite small. There's some games like Axie's doing 100,000 unique wallets every day. So tiny percentage, but it's already driving over 50% of the gas costs on Ronin. And if you look at the Katana is their DEX, their token exchange, and if you look at the liquidity pools on that, last time I looked, 9 of the top 10 in terms of daily transactions were from this sort of were from Craftworld. So it's just sort of really interesting to see when you drop a fully on-chain game. And I would say it's still in its early stages. I think they can grow bigger, but they just sort of come in and yeah, because I think they said it's on Katana now the daily transactions have gone up like tenfold or something like that, just because there were people like swapping, swap this to USDC, or maybe people sort of trading tokens like in a DeFi way. But now someone's just coming on and doing this sort of game. I mean, the game's not sort of really in a sense worth anything. The token price is not going up. There's not, there are people starting to try and work out how you make money on it, or for a low level, but it's just sort of interesting. And I think it's a game I say that I like and I play a lot. And it's a game, a bottom up game where there's basically all the assets are worth nothing at the moment, and they'll only be worth something if more people come along and play. Which is, I think, how asset value should be created in games. It's really sort of fascinating to see. So it was sort of one that sort of piqued my sort of attention.
We've got big potential there. So it's about 1,000 daily active players at the moment. If it were just tenfold that go up to 10,000, it doesn't sound that impressive, but that would really, I mean, break the traffic on Ronin.
Yep.
Anyway, let's move on. Talk about Ubisoft's second Web3 game, third Web3 Might and Magic Fates, the TCG that is launching on Immutable. At some point, they announced their first NFT drop coming 3rd of September, which is so the dropping bundles, which are non-NFT as well, for $50, and then they got this other package for $80, which includes one NFT. Is that right? Yeah,
I think so. Yeah. Did you say sort of it has sort of ended up. So you say it's Ubisoft's third blockchain game. The other two have not been successful, which is maybe a little bit. I mean, it's not necessarily their fault, but they've done it in a slightly odd way in many of those cases. This one is a much more traditional sort of game. It's a trading card game using the Might and Magic IP, which is sort of very well known, sort of old sort of RPG. Not like a massive game series, but sort of well known. It's a trading card game, as I sort of always say. People like trading card games because they're really generally quick to make, cheap to make. People sort of know roughly how trading card games sort of work, so it's not like a massive overhead of explaining to people, but they're not great. They're not really great mass market games, very hard to keep people in them. You end up with sort of a bloat of all these cards and people coming in and just like, how many, there's all these cards, which ones do I play best together? It's a really hard market from that point of view. So I don't, again, not wishing failure on any game. I just can't see it really doing anything. I guess the one sort of interesting thing is Immutable, who Ubisoft's working with as the sort of blockchain partner, have obviously been running their Gods Unchained game for 5-6 how many years now it is now, ages. So Ubisoft, Immutable does have a lot of experience of that genre. Maybe there's some sort of tricks they can pull off, but equally you kind of think with Immutable, are people going to be playing both those games, or is it going to cannibalize their existing game? It may make. I don't think Gods Unchained is doing super well, but people do still play it, and people have played it for many years. So almost like it may sort of kill off Gods Unchained. I don't know how they're going to work it out anyway. But as you say, yeah, they've announced on 3rd of September they're doing a sort of a pre-sale. So there's just a $50 digital asset sale where you get loads of free cards and exclusive cosmetics and it's sort of difficult with the trading card game. You get cards, but you don't want people to have play to win, so you can't give them cards that mean they're going to win all the time. So it's sort of difficult things. Why would I spend money to get some cosmetics for a game that's not even out yet? So there's a difficult thing on that. And then they're doing an $80 one, which has they're calling it the key founders bundle, and this key because there's a actual key to unlock a door. That's an NFT that's tradable. Now, quite what that does in the game, a trading card game. I mean, I'm not an expert in trading card games. I don't know if the key is it something you burn to get some other stuff. I don't know. I haven't looked into it, but it doesn't. I can't see that they've said.
Nothing to do with the keys that Immutable are rewarding people.
No. Well, no. Possibly they have not said that. That would be an interesting one. But yeah. So anyway, I think it's just sort of a thing that you can trade. So because they don't, for Gods Unchained, all the cards are NFTs, but I don't think they want to do that because it's very hard to not be play to win because you just buy the really high powered card, and it's not, you can have say in Reaper Actual, say in a shooter game, I buy a really high powered rifle. even if I'm not, I need to have skill with that as well. If I'm skillful and I have a high-powered rifle, I'm going to win everything. But in a card game, if you just buy a high-powered card, it's a high-powered card. So you don't really need skill. I mean, you just need skill exactly when to play.
How when to play that card.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. So I think that they have problems. You have problems with trading card games. There's other ways of designing them. There's some other interesting ones that we'll talk about next week, I think, of how you can design card NFTs in a way that does not change the game, but helps the economy. But anyway, we'll see how that one plays out. So, but it's more generally, I've sort of been looking at Immutable because I always do that, and it's interesting how that chain has really dropped. The activity on it's really dropped off a lot. So there's quite a lot riding on this game, I think. So it's sort of maybe going to get pushed quite heavily, I would think. But just trading card games, I just can't get them.
Okay, well, on that note, let's finish up. Thank you very much for tuning in, and we'll see you all next week again.